All right, Joe Gilford, welcome. You are an award-winning nominated screenwriter and screenwriting professor at NYU. Uh,
Yeah.
you have a screenwriting book out called "Why Does the Screenwriter Cross the Road and Other Screenwriting Secrets." We know you're very accomplished, and for listeners, a more thorough introduction of his accomplishments, see part one. This is the second part of our conversation with Joe. Um, and there's another story that we've learned about that's happened, sort of the plot points of your life. You grew up with famous parents. They were actors and eventually blacklisted actors, which was a very influential part of your life. You started in theater and film very young, and you've stayed in that world for a long time. So you've got 50, 60 years in this thing, very far down your path. You became a father during this time, and while you kept writing, there did come a time where you recognized you were not yeah, maybe taking this as seriously or more as focused, and you actually considered yourself an under earner and you finally started, or you, at some point in time, you started pulling your finances together, started teaching or teaching more, working more focused, and eventually got into a healthy romantic relationship. And while you have continued selling screenplays, teaching, even in the last couple of years, you've continued to put the pieces together and really take control of your finances, reduce your anxiety, and flourish in a more full and what seems like supported way than you ever have. And we'd like to hear more about that story. Welcome, Joe Gilford.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. Another wonderful introduction. You guys do a great job. And it's a pleasure to be here again. And I'm very flattered that I hadn't just shot my wad on the first show, which is always um, I had been, when you first interviewed me, I came to it more as an artist and a writer and prepared to talk on that. But what was wonderful, and I think what's wonderful about this show, podcast, I call it a show, is the idea of taking a deep dive into someone's life challenges. Because when I'm a sort of a podcast, or I'm a radio addict, as it were. I listen to interviews nonstop, and I did it for therapeutic kind of reasons. When I first got divorced, I moved into a new apartment in the same neighborhood as my ex-wife, so that I could take care of my son. We had a shared custody, and it was not a disastrous divorce. It was a disastrous marriage in a way, but or it became disastrous or untenable. So I got an apartment, and there I was, a bachelor again after 13 years of being with my wife. And I used to tune into, Terry Gross,
Oh yeah.
Fresh Air on NPR. Really a master interviewer.
Yeah, absolutely.
She is the model. And
Yeah.
if I ever did what you do, I would use her as the model. Very thoughtful. And so I began listening to the show, which aired in my area at around dinner time. So I was alone some nights because I didn't have my son, or I wasn't seeing anybody, something like. And I would be making dinner. I'm a bit of a bachelor chef, and I would use these interviews to keep me company. And I was dining with some of the great leaders, musicians, artists,
Yeah.
writers, filmmakers, actors of the time. And so it's sort of the value of these kinds of conversations is really not to be underestimated, is my point. I think that you can get, and I would listen to these interviews, not simply to understand their work, the people that were talking, but to understand their lives. And I think that's really what's important. And as Dan said, I am the child of famous people, which in itself is kind of it's a different subset of sort of family. When you're a famous kid, a kid of a famous person. And my father became more famous as I became a teenager, so that the conflicts between us became more intense as he became more successful, and neither begat the other. The conflicts one has with one's parents as a teenager are natural, and I think unavoidable, and should not be avoided, I think. But his fame sort of made me a victim of that. And that I thought people would give me things because of that. And I would resent that. I would, oh, you're Jack's son. Oh, yeah, you'll get this job. Oh, yeah, you get this. which is only a little bit true. Being the son of someone, and I went into the family business. My mother was an actress and became a casting director and a producer as well. I went into the family business, and this is not a curse. It does open doors. It does. If you're, if your last name is Gable or Monroe or Clooney, that will open a door. But the industry is very discriminating, I believe, when it comes to talent. It is, believe it or not, or at least what they feel is workable talent. So you still have to pay your dues, and you still have to prove your worth after you walk in the door. And that's the hard part. And that's where I sort of had problems, was really proving my talent and also growing my talent. You can be born with talent. And I think everyone sort of is. Finding it is the journey.
Did you have a sense at the beginning whether that talent was going to be in acting, or was it more, or did you feel early on that writing was going to be your wheelhouse?
I was a natural performer, an actor, class clown, if you will. I wasn't the only one either. And I wasn't the ringleader. Don't accuse me of that.
Do you mean in your family or within your friend group?
No, in life, in school, in my social life. But I was part of a crew of funny, smart kids.
Where did you go to school?
Well, I went to
New York City?
a sort of special kind of private school. It wasn't a prep school. It was, at that time, it was sort of the alternative school where everybody who was a leftist kind of person went. And that was called, ironically, and no pun intended, Little Red Schoolhouse in Greenwich Village. It's a famous place. It's a famous private school in New York, and it had a high school attached to it. So I attended that school from nursery school to grade 12. And I actually spent all those years with a core group of about 14 kids who started with me in nursery. And there was people coming in and out. We had a graduating class of only 35 kids. And it still survives. It's a very successful school right now. But at that time, while it wasn't on the fringe, it was part of a sort of subset of alternative high schools that brought about what was then called progressive education, which was simply allowing a child to flourish. I think Montessori and Waldorf are the equivalents now, but slightly more formal and more, dogmatic in their way. Little Red Schoolhouse allowed you to enjoy learning. That was, what a concept. And also it was very physically active kind of place. We had music class, was filled with dance, was filled with banging on things, that kind of stuff when we were little. So I was in that kind of rarefied atmosphere. And these were also children of other artists, performers, and progressive thinkers and people like that. So there was that sort of rarefied atmosphere. And then also the rarefied world of show business, theater, musicals, film, the world that my father was in. Now, as I think I told you in the last show, my parents were progressive thinkers. Obviously, that's, part of my legacy. And they were blacklisted during the McCarthy era. And that led to my father not being able to work in film or television for almost a decade, about 8 years. Wow. Same with my mother. So film, radio and television, actually. Radio was still something you could work in as even an actor. But he was lucky enough as a character actor to be able to work steadily on Broadway. It wasn't the same money, of course, but he really went from show to show in the 50s and was in some pretty famous shows. He was in the original Diary of Anne Frank on Broadway in the mid-50s, another Paddy Chayefsky play called 10th Man, and also musicals like A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum with Zero Mostel, and Cabaret, both of which he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Tonys. Did not win, but, Now, my father's story isn't just show business. He's someone who came from terrible poverty. His mother was a single Jewish woman, brought him and his two brothers up in Williamsburg on her own. She was a part-time midwife. She ran a lunch counter. She was a bootlegger, which is absolutely true. And she did that part-time, all to patch things together, which I think is what my parents, my mother's parents were career garment workers. But my father's mother was this woman who just patched things together. And you can only imagine what it was like to be a single woman raising 3 boys in Brooklyn in what was not even pre-war. It was the 1930s, 1920s. My father was born in 1908. So when he had me, his first child, he was 44, which at that time was quite a bit older than you should be to have your first kid. So in that, there was also that legacy as well, which is that in our family, you worked. In our family, you tried to do something and patch things together. And bringing this whole thing back to my journey, the journey has been a kind of patchwork. There is not that steady target thing that I didn't really acquire, I would say, until recently, but that means about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that? Because I'm a little surprised to hear that, because unlike a lot of people, I don't know, I guess I haven't met too many people who have 50 years in a field. So it seems like you have kind of been driving towards a goal. Are you talking about what was being patchworked together? Is this kind of this other thing that we're talking about, which is like your maturity as a human, or what do you mean?
Well, I was not one. I had thought I was going to be an actor. That sort of
Oh, I see.
left me when I was a teenager, and I started making little films on my own with my friends. And
I
then I
got you.
was going to be a film director, and that was from the age of 14 till I was about, I guess, about 23, until I was about 30. But in that career, I kind of didn't really, I sort of took whatever pathway led to a paycheck.
I see. I see.
And not in a mercenary way, in a necessary way. It was practical.
Yeah.
I was not directing feature films. I was not in a point where I was toting around scripts, or I was out in Hollywood, where some of my contemporaries went out and sort of still had Roger Corman doing stuff for young directors and all that. And they clicked and they scored. I tried, and I used my NYU student short starring my father, which got attention for that. But it wasn't good enough. It just wasn't good enough. It
Was that
not
hard on you when you were young and I mean, now it
Yeah.
sounds like you could say that with some clarity, but at the time, do you feel like they owed you something, or you had a kind of, you just felt like maybe you deserved to be in there?
I felt that, yes. I felt
Yeah.
that a certain gravity would take over, that a natural kind of gravity that I would fall into this thing.
Yeah.
And I think that is the change that has taken me over in the last few decades, which I think is also part of maturity.
Yep.
If you really know where you're headed, you'll get there. And I thought I did, but I didn't really know where I was headed.
Hmm.
I hadn't really made the strong enough choice. Everyone talks about love what you do. That would be great. But also you can love what you're good at. And I didn't quite know. I wasn't as good at one thing that I thought I was, as I actually was better at another. And it took me a while to say, wait a second, what about this other thing?
Which was
I never
writing.
taking myself seriously as a writer, because I don't know, I
Wow.
thought writers were different types of people. That was really it. I didn't think I was the writer type, but this is the kind of just the kind of thinking that sort of takes you over when you're not clear on your goals. Now, listen, not everybody, my son, for instance, is sort of drifting about. He didn't have the good fortune. I at least knew something, even if it was not the thing. At least I was really certain that I loved filmmaking and that I was going to pursue that. And I was really certain about that from the age of 14, 15. But that changed. That really changed. And I was not prepared for the change. And I went for it actually in the same way as I was pursuing a paycheck. My first professional writing gig came to me on a show called The Days and Nights of Molly Dodd. It was one of the first, I would say, more intellectual comedies of the early cable years. It was on Arts and Entertainment. At the time, Eric Overmyer, who ended up on The Wire, and he now does Bosch, was the young showrunner, a playwright too, someone I knew. And he knew me and my wife. My wife was a prominent and very smart cabaret singer, believe it or not. And she had made quite a splash, and we were doing stuff together. And so he hired us. He hired us to do an episode, and we got paid good money for it. But he had a problem with the major producer of the show, and he was fired. And all the scripts that he had hired all his friends to do, me and comedian Louis Black, he was one of them too. And he threw all those scripts out. So the scripts never got to the air. They never got on the air.
Interesting.
But I sort of said, gee, I've been given some kind of professional imprimatur here, This is an endorsement by somebody prominent. And then began this whole other journey to really sort of prove to myself that I was a writer. And then you do, excuse me, you do have to prove it to everyone else ultimately.
See, TV writing, is that where you started, or was it feature-length film?
Well, I thought I was going to write features. Let's go back, Ron. We'll go back. This is the dissolve with the smoke and the ripples of the water.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what writing was, even though I thought I could do it. Now I do. I teach it. My teaching actually was really instrumental in my discovering what it was. And when I say what it was, is the same way you do the podcast. I'm sure, were you a master of audio and engineering and Mac tools when you decided to do this?
Far from it. Still far from it.
So you stuck your finger in and just saw what you were going to find.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I did with writing. Thank God I had what was then called the West Bank Downstairs Theater Bar, which was actually run by Louis Black, Rand Foster, Rusty McGee, who sadly passed away many years ago. But they ran a place where you could do 2 one-act plays a night. It was an 8:30 show and a 10 o'clock show. And then at midnight on Saturdays, they'd have what they call the Midnight Free Show. Louis would host about 7 comics, and you'd be there till 3 in the morning listening to great comedians, really good ones. Anyway, that was the atmosphere there, and they would let me do whatever I wanted. They let me be a director down there. I worked with Louis. I worked with actors like John Bowman, who's now Louis's opening act, and a bunch of other people. And I sort of became a place where I could easily do my writing. In other words, I came to Rand, who was the artist, and say, can I do this? I have this Steve, my friend Steve, is lined up as an actor. Yes. That was not the way it was at New York Theater. New York Theater was as difficult to penetrate as a new writer as Hollywood would be for a new screenwriter. Someone with no reputation at all. But this was an open door. So I was really lucky to be part of this. And seeing your work performed, we talked about this last time. You're writing for performance, but getting your work on its feet tomorrow, there's nothing more thrilling than that. And that's when the bug hit me. I was in my mid-30s by then.
Wow.
And that's where I really said, I can do this. Now I get it. Now I can see why I can do this better than that other thing. It was odd.
Do you think before, when you didn't have the I know you already answered this, but I'm going to ask you again because I wasn't satisfied with your answer. And that was when you were
revoke my right under the 5th and a half Amendment. That's a very special amendment for interviews. I will not repeat my answer.
Well, when I asked you about you went in and you were at first interested in acting, and then you thought writing was done by certain kind of people. Was there a kind of lack of confidence in that as well? Because I think as a writer for myself, or myself as a writer, I'm sorry, I had these short little pieces of fiction that I'd put out, and I'd have professors that would give me accolades. My brain just immediately went to say, I might as well try to go be a rock star. Like that was the leap that I thought, I can't even pursue that because I might as well just strap a guitar on myself and try to get a record deal. Like that's what it seemed like, even though I had an insane amount of love and affection for the process, for the results when I finished it, all of those things. And so I didn't take that seriously. So my lack of confidence came from just thinking that success as a writer was just, you know, I might as well try to be an astronaut. How about for you? I mean, you mentioned
I
that.
would take, you see, I any pat on the back at all to me meant that I could be a master of that universe. And that was my mistake.
Yeah.
Because you do need, it's not like you're taking a consensus, but you do need to listen to everybody.
Yeah.
And you do need to understand who's telling you this. And you need to then construct your own kind of network of sort of trustworthy alliances and critics and people who mentor you. And that's one of the ways you're navigating and patching it together. People came to me, they loved my short film, but those were my parents' friends. Actually, they were in the business too. And when I went to show them my short film when I was just out of college, people went, "Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thanks. Goodbye." And a whole other thing began to take shape. And I continued to try to prove myself at that. I directed theater with some small success. But you know, it's funny. I came into theater directing from the back door because I'd really been trained as a filmmaker, although I knew theater intuitively from my background. But I came into writing from the basement door. And it was—
What do you mean by that?
I had no formal training as a writer, except for some creative fiction writing I took in college, except for another nonfiction writing class I took with the wonderful book writer named James Atlas, who just passed away like last year, 2 years ago. And I took this, I knew I needed to train. And that's really valuable. You know, you do, when you see something you want to do, okay, go take a guitar lesson. Go see if you can work the controls.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who will never be able to learn to drive an automobile. There are, you know, they all live in New York. No, it's true. We have so much public transportation. There's no way you need to learn to drive, but it is a lot like driving. It's a very practical thing, and you just need to learn how to work the controls, and that takes some humility.
Yeah.
Now, that's very interesting, Ron, that you refuse to recognize the fact that someone said, "Good job." Someone said, "Do this," and you went, "I don't know if I can't be Philip Roth, what's the point?" Now that is where you can put your goals out of reach.
Yeah.
And that is, you're getting into a different kind of pathology there. And it is, being an artist is a construct of pathology. It's a positive pathology, but it is a construct of a personal sort of path, and that's pathology.
Interesting. I had a similar experience where I met a storyteller who had a lot of success in New York writing soap operas, and then some like evening time dramas. And then he went on to create a very popular TV adventure show in the 80s. And I met him through some mutual friends, and I ended up doing a little bit of work for him. And
some MacGyver guy?
Yeah. Lee Zlotoff. Do you know this guy? You ever heard of him?
Oh, Lee Zlotoff. I know the name. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a big name.
Yeah. So I don't know how this happened to me, but they had a small production crew that were doing documercials. And I got hired because I knew one of actually a friend of mine went to NYU Film School. He would have graduated 2003, so 2004, something like that.
And they've had him as a student.
Yeah. And he was this guy was making, lots of money filming music videos, and he hated it. Like, he hated what he was doing. And he was trying to find meaning in his work. And so he's doing these documercials for nonprofits. And suddenly I'm in there. I don't know how I got there, but I'm in there. And Lee asked me one night, as they threw me a birthday party, I don't know why, but happened to be my birthday. They threw me a birthday party. And Lee goes, "Tell me about your father." And it just so happened that my father had passed away maybe 18 months beforehand, maybe 2 years. And it was a comedy of errors. It was a bumbling adventure every step of the way that just continued to get worse and worse.
Your dad's life, you mean?
My dad's funeral from the moment he died until I put him in the ground.
Oh my gosh, I think I heard this story.
And
isn't this a great story?
Yeah, I mean, I
sounds like a good. I'm waiting to hear it.
Well, I mean,
you might need to tell that story, Ron.
Those hard stories are always good stories.
It's been a long. I'll say this: the beginning is I'm living as a poor student in Orange County, California, in a very wealthy neighborhood with my wife at the time, in her parents' house. We were in her childhood bedroom because we couldn't afford to live in Orange County. And I was managing a rock climbing gym and making, $11 an hour, $12 an hour, something like that. And there's a loud banging on the door at 2 a.m. And I look outside and it's a California state trooper. And I thought, this has got to be something going on with our climbing gym. There's an intruder, there's something, and I'm the guy they got to call. And he goes, Ron Cecil. I go, yes. He goes, here, call this number. I look at it and I call this number, and there's this woman sobbing on the other line, and she's sobbing with a Southern accent, if you can imagine that. And I'm like, why do I know this voice? Where is this? And she starts telling me, he's gone. I'm sorry, baby, he's gone. And I go, oh, this is my stepmom that I've only met once. My dad was married 8 times before he died. And she goes, your daddy's best friend will call you shortly to give you the arrangements. I go, my dad doesn't have a best friend. I don't like, who is she talking about? And then the phone rings and it says Richard Nixon on it, on the caller ID. And I'm like, who the hell is this guy? And I pick up the phone. He says, my name's Richard Nixon. I'm your daddy's best friend. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here?
Are you still dreaming?
Yeah. And he goes, I'm a Mason with your daddy. And we're going to take care of your dad's funeral. I'm like, no, sir, that's not what's supposed to happen. My dad knew he was probably going to die. And he asked me to make his arrangements for his funeral and speak at his funeral. I'm a trained pastor. This is what it's going to be. This is where his dying wish. He goes, no, sir, it's not. We're going to take this over. And it began this battle between me and this like funny group of old men at this Masonic lodge in the middle of nowhere, Texas.
Was it the Richard Nixon or a Richard Nixon?
It was a Richard Nixon.
Amazing.
But he was as crooked and weird as the Richard Nixon.
Amazing.
And one of the Masons owned a funeral home that was also a Coca-Cola museum. And you walk into this funeral home and there's Coca-Cola memorabilia. He's like, please, come to the viewing of the body and help yourself.
Sounding almost like George Saunders wrote it.
He's like, help yourself to Coca-Cola product while you're here. And then I meet my stepmother and my my stepbrother who I'd never met. And it just continues to get weird. It culminates in my dad being lowered into a grave with fire ants coming out, walking into the audience, biting people as it's going on. So I'm telling Lee this, and he's like, man, that'd be a great screenplay. And I go, I've been thinking about that. He goes, well, write it and we'll talk about it. And so I wrote it, and it took me a while. I got it done and I sent it over to him, and he's like, yeah, man, these are caricatures of characters. You're a little over on some of this stuff, and try it again. And my brain, unfortunately, didn't I was thinking, if I could hit this home run the first time, I'll have done it.
And you'd never written a screenplay before?
Never.
Right. There is a pathology to expectations as well.
Yeah.
I think expectations as a category needs to be put in that book that Shrinks use. Expectations should be a condition of some kind of pathology.
That's a
recognizable
really
pathology.
Absolutely.
Because we all distort it, and I am very much a kindred spirit to that.
Yeah.
That same thing. And I thought some things too. My problem was at least you finished the screenplay, right? You did 100 pages or so. Yeah. Really great. I never got that far. So I thought I could show people fragments and have them go, this is going to be a great screenplay. Here's some money. Go finish it. And that became a kind of satiric, a self-satirizing part of me later on when I started writing my own character into my plays called Mickey. And Mickey was the name of my father's character in Finks as well, my play. But anyway, yes, I hear you, Ron.
Yeah.
And it's like, all you got to do is go rewrite.
Well, I years later I heard, I can't remember where it was, but that the average screenplay goes through 11 drafts before it.
And that's average, meaning that most of the really good ones go through more. And if you're not done you're not done on the 20th draft, and you're not done until it goes in front of the cameras.
Yeah.
You're not done until a director starts picking apart, and you're not done until George Clooney starts looking at it on the set and going, I got to change this line. James Franco or Mark Ruffalo or Kate Blanchett. Can we just make that this? Because it's easy, because you're writing for performance. So that's the last person to handle it will be an actor. And you will get, now some actors are very disciplined and refuse to make any changes to the writing. So there's that too. But you fell into that thing where you didn't know how much work was involved.
Well, people, I think, were trying to tell me, and I was gleefully, willfully being unaware. Like I was deciding that somehow I was the exception to the rule.
But you didn't feel you were resentful of them. You just, or were you? Were you saying,
I wasn't resentful of them.
They say it is. Was that your attitude?
Yeah, I didn't think they were resentful. It's almost like the guy who's going to the bodega and buying a lottery ticket, and he's sure he's going to win. He has a complete confidence that Powerball is in his favor that day. That's kind of the silliness that I felt around writing that in my 20s.
Well, I hear two things going on. First of all, you didn't know what you were doing, and therefore you didn't know how to continue.
Yeah.
When you know what you're doing, you know how to continue. You know what the next step is. Not knowing what the next step is the thing that will hurt you and really stop you.
That's interesting you say that,
because understanding the next step in anything.
Yeah.
And that includes relationships.
That's right. There's a phrase I stole from a group of anonymous folks I've hung out with over the years. That is, all we got to know is the next right step. And that's what was my problem back then. And I think happens to a lot of us. And if we don't know the next right step, then we just don't do anything.
I think you have to also be prepared to take the next wrong step.
Yeah.
That's like what you said last time, where you said,
you can't, if you had proper training, and I try to tell my students, it's a cliche, writing is just rewriting. And they don't really understand that. They do think they're going to hit, that home run, as you said, right at the first pitch.
Yeah.
On the first pitch, not just the third swing, Yeah.
And what's important? Oh, sorry, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
What I think is important keep listening to all this and keep thinking over and over about when someone's trying to put their life together. I feel like they run into the same exact thing. They're like, okay, I'm aware of what I need to do differently, and I'm going to do it. And then you start to do it, and it's like a really bad screenplay, it's a bad first effort. And I think that probably the thing that I most believe in life and I'm a proponent of is that like writing a complex piece of art, like a screenplay or a book, it might be a wreck at first, but to keep going and that there's a lot of different aspects to it. And maybe you can get better at one aspect, and maybe everything else sucks for like a long time. But if you do this one little thing better, and then you approach it again, then the whole thing will be a little better. And then if you can organize your life to a point where you can have the privilege of going through that process without having to get a job that is just so stressful and takes you out, or the things that you're not doing well enough, or the ways you don't know yourself, lead to a relationship that is just overwhelmingly anxiety ridden and promoting, those are the real parts that inspire compassion. I don't know what to do with that. I'm not speaking to those situations, but when you do get to a place where you can start to put some pieces together, I feel like do that for 10 years, you know? And that's kind of what we were talking about a little earlier today, Joe, about is it sounds like you somehow did that with your life on a whole. And I don't want to get away from this delightful screenwriting conversation, but I just paralleling it too to creating a life where you can now, it sounds like you're set up for decades, you know, to be able to flourish and relax and work hard. You know, those things are kind of opposite, but they're not. And
Oh,
I hear you, Ron, on the screenplay. And I actually wanted to ask you, Ron, to wrap it back around. Is it meaningful that we're talking to Joe about this? Because you still have that screenplay holstered, don't you?
I do have the screenplay holstered. I don't know, meaningful. I would say intimidating, and also, you know, when I look at my old writing, I just think, well, like it's you know, I have two kids, and they go, God, you know, Dad, look at this great painting I did, and we put it up on the refrigerator, and I pat them on the head, and I said, that's great, and you know, the camera pans to it, and it's just like a smudge of paint. I mean, that's how I feel about that screenplay. So I don't feel entirely like it's precious anymore. I did for a long time. And now I'm realizing it needs, you know, it doesn't need a new coat of paint. It needs to be torn down to the studs and reworked probably in ways that I can't even imagine. So yeah, thank you. And it is meaningful. But here, I'm really glad you brought it back to life, Daniel, because in a way, what I want to do is kind of compare and contrast my life to Joe's life, in the sense that I thought I had one chance. I didn't. I thought I did. And when I failed in that one chance, I just gave up. I walked away from that. And I didn't quite burn bridges, but I didn't keep up with Lee. I could have, there's a parallel universe where I could have decided, look, I enjoyed this so much that I'm going to throw myself into the writing community. I'm going to move to New York. I'm going to go take classes. I'm going to go get an MFA, whatever it is, any of the number of ways that I could continue to write. But because I wasn't the miracle baseball hitter that I thought I should have been, I decided to take the safe route, which was business. And quite frankly, I spent more than a decade being a very resentful business person, with this thing in the back of my mind of like, I'm not really paying attention to the part of me that I really want to pay attention to, which is writing. And it wasn't until about 2 years ago where I thought, I have to feed this thing in my soul, no matter what the success level is. Even if it means I'll never be successful at it, even if it means that maybe there might be success, but it might come 5, 10, 20 years down the line. None of those matter. This is really a matter of feeding my soul now and honoring my soul now and loving myself in a way that I never have before. And that's a hard lesson. And it's like, I wish I could like open young people's heads up and go, look, you've got a certain amount of time that's not guaranteed. It's absolutely not guaranteed. So why waste your breath on shit that you're going to be resentful? You know, you're going to be resentful about it. You can tell, like, you know, even filling out the application for this job or during the interview, you know already. So why even go into it?
well,
I can only
yeah.
say that having done that.
Yeah. Well, listen, you have to decide why you're doing it and what you want out of it. If you're going to say, okay, I want to be a screenwriter I just want to write screenplays and show them to my writing group, and that's it, or have readings, or just not, or just put them in a drawer and just do it. Just like some people like to get out a book and do sketches, and they're awfully good at it. Yeah. And I know, Dan, you came to your art. It looked to me like another choice. I have no idea whether you had done it before, but it looks like you just took a natural route to something that was, and whether you show or sell or not may not matter to you. You got to decide what it is you're going to make and how much it matters to you, what you're going to do with it. Now, it matters to me now that I get produced as a playwright. It matters to me that I get produced as a writer of any kind, screenwriter, TV, and that's really hard. But I'm not going to think that I'm a bad writer if I don't get produced.
Yeah.
That's the difference.
Yeah.
The difference is, am I going to get up at bat and hit the first pitch out of the park and then give up if it's, a foul ball or it's a fly out? No, you do have to get back to it. You absolutely get back to it. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, start all over again. That's a Rodgers and Hart tune, written with the lyrics by Larry Hart, great lyricist. Yeah, but you've also got to decide why you're doing it. Like my friend Ed sat across from me at lunch last year. And he said, Joe, you've just got to decide why you're writing. Because I had stopped. I'd stopped for a couple of reasons. I had stopped because I could. I had stopped because I just completed this screenplay for Finks, which I had made into something I wasn't expecting to make it into. And I felt very successful at simply having done that, showing it to a couple of trusted people, getting the reflection of my, good accomplishment, and then just hoping for the best.
Yeah.
That's the last part. And that's where you have to get started on the next project. Because there is a gamble involved, and your lottery analogy is perfect, because this is the way I tell my students it is to be pretty much any kind of writer, especially a screenwriter. You're waiting on this long line with a whole bunch of other people. It's like a Dr. Seuss line. It's over hill and dale, this string of people going into the horizon. And you do move up, but it's awfully slow. And you're still working and you're still doing your stuff. And so you finally get to the head of the line. And there's a guy at a table with a ledger, and he checks off your name, and he gives you a voucher to play roulette. That's what being a screenwriter is.
Yeah.
John August, great screenwriter, Big Fish, and those great screenplays he wrote for Tim Burton. He says it's like, as a writer, you're chipping away at this really thick stone wall forever, and you hammering away at it, hammering with this little stupid lame hammer called your talent, right? And you hammer away, chip away, and you finally get through to the other side, and there's another wall. And that's the way you have to. I think it's more realistic to look at it that way for me, so that I don't give up when I hit that other wall. That I just know I'm just going to have to chip through that, and that the work itself is its own reward. I have to say.
Yeah, Dan, that's something Daniel and I
or else you're
talk
crazy.
about frequently. If you aren't in love with the process, if you aren't in love with the work, you're gonna burn out. It's gonna burn you up pretty fast. And
I hate to interrupt you, but I want to give permission for you to not love it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I remember you talking about
you don't have to love work. You don't. You just have to do it. You can love it, or an aspect of it. But I just want to say, if loving it is part of your process, then love it to death. For me, working it is part of what I love, rather than just loving the process. Working stuff out and getting to the end of the day with a finished scene or a first draft of something, then it's good. It's time to get out the wine, and it's you get that's the reward, is completion. But
that's what I was gonna say. Like,
for me, see, I get scared when people say you gotta love it, because I don't.
Well, go ahead, Daniel. I got something to say after that. Go ahead, Daniel.
I was just gonna say, like, all of those things I think very much are true. Some people love it, some people don't. I've actually been in both camps personally. And I understand that. And then everything you were talking about before that, Joe, is also obviously, some people skip the line, that can happen, but I think the expectation that if you can set your life up to a point where you can wait in line for a long, long time and be okay, then that's the goal. Then that's more sustainable, because I think maybe what happens is when we pursue something when we're young, we kind of have that one, like, get out of jail free card through our 20s, maybe 20s, 30s. I don't know. But as time goes on, as I've experienced it, I need to be supported in all of these different ways that I didn't need to be supported back then. Like in my 20s, I didn't need to take care of my body very well. I didn't need to eat the right things. I could drink a lot more than I maybe could or should have. I didn't have to have my finances together as much. I didn't have to have my relationships. I could be in conflict with my family, but I could still kind of do the thing that would get me to where I wanted to go ambitiously or professionally. And now it's different. And I need to have all of this. I need to have like a team of people and some infrastructure around that supports all this process, that supports the waiting in line, that this supports the days that I don't enjoy it at all. And if I don't have that stuff, things start to go pear-shaped. I lose my balance and, split my differential and tip the fuck over. It's one of my favorite lines from Wolf of Wall Street. Um, so I just think it's important to recognize that and how people have put the pieces together. It's what I was kind of talking about with you earlier today. Just putting that infrastructure together so you can go the long haul. That's pretty much just what I wanted to say, Ron.
I agree. I think that writers within their character, and the phrase that I love best is Flaubert, who said, "You must be quiet and ordinary in your life in order to be violent and original in your work." And that was, for me, getting to an ordinary life is what you're talking about, Dan.
Nice.
And that really does, the kind of thinking and work you need to do as any kind of artist needs to be within the serenity of something. You need to be within a serenity. The program preaches this. I'm not in it, but I know a lot about it because it's around us. I believe it's the new religion. I do.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes it involves religion and sometimes it doesn't. But regardless, it's a path to healing and serenity. And I think you just need to do that. Now, some of our greatest geniuses did not have the most balanced inner lives. And you look at the F. Scott Fitzgeralds, Hemingways, Picassos of our time. But I think they got the most attention. Some of the greatest screenwriters who, like right now, Walter Bernstein, who wrote The Front and a bunch of other scripts and was also blacklisted in the 50s, is turning 100. Donald Ogden Stewart was a great screenwriter, also one of the blacklisted screenwriters. He lived into his 90s. So I'm thinking that serenity gives you the time, because if you're not burning the candle at both ends, you do have time. You have time to do it over. You have time to try something else. You have time to give yourself, and you're not propelled by anxiety anymore.
Yeah.
You may be propelled by ambition. You may be propelled by a fantasy. It's an expectation.
Chagall, the painter Chagall.
I want to be up there saying, I want to thank Dan and Ron for this, and you want to be up there. That's okay too, because a fantasy can fuel very real work. And so whatever it is you choose to do it for that reason. But be honest, I think we all will agree it's not easy.
It's really not easy. One of the things that kept coming to my mind, and this is unfortunately, hopefully not too worn out of a metaphor for Daniel, because he's heard me mention stuff like this over and over. But I always come back to rock climbing because that's what I know. And there's some writer came up with this idea a few years ago of type 1, type 2, and type 3 fun. and type 1 fun is where you're experiencing something in the moment. And in the moment, it's fun. Like you're glad you have done it. So that would be, playing ball and it's in your sinking shots and it's happening. As a climber, it's climbing, your body feels good, you're not afraid, it's going on. Type 2 fun is where you're doing the activity and it might be a little strenuous, it might be a little difficult, it might be a little hard, but at the end you're like, that was pretty fun. There's a thrill to it. Type 3 fun is when at no point during any of the activity is it fun at all. In fact, you really wish you weren't doing it. And you're swearing off that you'll ever do it again. And at the end of it, even after you've said, I'm fucking never going back up that mountain again, type 3 fun is going, I'm going to start planning my next trip. And I think that mirrors this kind of work where sometimes you're flowing. Like Daniel and I talk about this. Sometimes we're writing and I'm like almost crying at the things I'm writing. I'm laughing at it. And I go back and look at it like, that's garbage. And then there's other times where I go through the wall and I hit the next wall. I'm like, God, I don't know what's going to happen with this. And someone's like, that's actually really good. I'm like,
The last thing you turned in for the writing group was like that. Remember, you were like, this is going to be trash. And then you had all three of us just like, we didn't have a lot negative to say. You know, it was just really fun and interesting and surprising because we're all getting to know each other. To see someone like you consider yourself the beginner in our writing group, and yet you're like flexing these muscles that, you know, or exhibiting abilities that others of us in the writing group are like, man, I wish I could do that, you know. And that was something I remember you saying you thought it was, yeah, who knows? I don't know. It's not that great, whatever. Go figure, you know. But I wanted to, go ahead. I just wanted to, before, please hold that thought, Joe. Eckhart Tolle is like, he's a spiritual type of guy, and he does another thing. Wrote a great book called A New Earth. He says the same thing you're saying in a slightly different way. I thought it might be valuable. If you're doing something and you're not experiencing joy, that would be type 1 fun. Enthusiasm, type 2 fun.
Right.
Or acceptance, you know, type 3 fun. Then you should maybe stop doing it, you know. And I think that that's pretty valuable. And I think that that's what Joe's saying is like, he's accepted, you know, his writing. Maybe he's enthusiastic a lesser to extent, and then rarely, but sometimes maybe it's joyful. And then maybe you, Ron, your equation of writing, you know, your emotional experience of it is like maybe the opposite of that. But, you know, at least everything is in those three boxes, you know, those three sort of aspects. That's all I wanted to say about that.
That's a great book. I think if anyone's not read that, they should read that book.
I was a big fan of therapy. I started therapy when I was a teenager because I was not doing well in school. I was taking drugs and ripping and running and having a great time. But, you know, I was flunking out of high school, and my parents sent me to a really cool shrink who I ended up staying with for well into my late 20s, early 30s, on and on, after I got married and then after, there was a point where I was again in crisis during my divorce. And I went to a woman who called herself a metaphysician. Her name was Judy. And I've lost track of her, and I think she passed away. But in those years, I spent 4 years with her, and she was basically a healer kind of person. And it was a $35 one-on-one session. And then she'd give me a foot massage at the end. But she was also a registered reflexologist, and she had run a shop too. Anyway, she showed me a lot. And the one thing, a lot of things she showed me are, first of all, MONEY stands for my own natural energy yield. My own natural energy yield. You know, I sound like one of those psychic preachers now, but it really said, wait a second, if I put in enough energy and guide myself through this thing, yes, I will, because money was this issue for me. And the other thing was, she felt there were 4 parts to us, 4 kind of slots in our lives that have to be kept in balance. And those 4 slots were work, love with your partner, and then the other is love and working with your family and friends. And then the 4th part is you. Giving yourself part of that 25% balance. And you got all 4 things working at once, you'll feel okay. So people who work too hard and can't give an even amount of time to the other 3 will feel a life out of balance. People who are too involved in their love life and not enough in their work, which was my problem, will feel their life out of balance. And so if you want to work on that level too, just to sort of keep track of yourself, you know, there is a balance you need. You have to give yourself to all those things in order for all of them to succeed.
Joe, do you think that you have would you say that you have that balance achieved right now?
Come to it. It's not, you know, it's not easy to follow these kinds of things, even though they sound good.
I think we can all agree on that.
You know, it's hard to humble yourself to the task of life without saying, I know this already. I'm fine. Everyone says they're fine. Everyone says my script is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Or My script sucks and you're going to hate it. You know, we can't get into a thing where, yeah, I wrote something. Tell me what you think and I'll make it better. What happened to that?
That's where I'm trying to be.
My
and everything.
students are always panicked. You know, there comes a point where we're developing work, and in one class we do 2 short scripts per semester. It's 14 weeks. So there's always this sort of climax of 7 weeks of presenting the final script, even though we've seen the pitch, we've seen the beat sheet, but all have come under class criticism and comments and all that. So by this time, they're presenting their script. This idea has been trod on and shared and announced and revealed for 7 weeks. And there's no thrill to it at all. But then we put it up on the screen. We used to print it out and hand it out. We put it up on the screen. Each person gets assigned a role and we read it out loud. And boy, is it always good? It's always good. And this, I always ask the students, anything you want to tell us? Well, this sucks and this sucks and this sucks. I said, is there anything you like about it? Not really. Okay. Then we read it. No. Now, most of that's just a mental sort of exhaustion.
Yeah.
The strain of familiarity, because any project you embark on as an artist or a writer, you know, you're not writing a screenplay a week. You can't. Not of any quality, you know. You need to spend anywhere between 3 months is the Writers Guild. 14 weeks is like the Writers Guild minimum for a first draft. All right. Mm-hmm. So you're spending a minimum of 3 months to, let's say, 2 years on this damn thing. Mm-hmm. And by the end of it, you're going, I don't even remember whether it's any good anymore. But that's where revealing this to a circle of other colleagues, and I mean just people who I show my script, my girlfriend, Kathy. She's my trusted demographic. She's not in show business per se. She's not an experienced writer, really, although she reads and she watches a lot of TV and movies with me. But when she looks at something, she'll be totally honest with me because she doesn't know the tricks. And she doesn't know the flourishes. And she doesn't have a point of reference except how it gets into her. So I get some critique from her, and then I get critique from a couple of teachers at school who are experienced writers. And I'm very, very fortunate that I have people who do this for each other. That's the exchange.
You know, it's funny.
Each other's stuff, and we're honest with each other about, but also we know how to deliver that news. And that's so important. And I hope in your writers group, you're learning how to deliver the news. And that takes some maturity. I train my students to be good colleagues, not just try to get their talent onto the page, but I also train them to be good colleagues and professionals. So there's a point where I go, well, thank you, Darian, but what you really meant to say was, I liked it, but because starting a sentence like that is the difference between, let's say, a producer you feel like you could work with, or a director or actor you can work with, and somebody who really is never satisfied. People who always go, nah, do this, that. I try to stay away from them. Now, sometimes you can't. Sometimes they're paying you, and you have to sit and take it. So there's that too. But I would say, go where the lights are green so that you can keep moving. Don't go anywhere where people stop you, because that is not what you want.
I find it to be a little bit like if I say I liked it, but it sounds like I just took away that I liked it. I've kind of been saying like I liked it and at the same time, or I liked it and I think our group does that pretty well. If anything though, I think that, and I don't know how you feel, Ron, but I feel like we're all like through the what do you call it, the honeymoon phase, where we're all just like all over each other, you know, and and part of that all over each other is that no one's mean, you know, and everyone will say things that they would like improved. But I actually think we can go a little further into like not harder criticism, but just being a little bit more direct, because that when I finished my book proposal, when I was first pitching this story that I've worked on for living it, it's been about 10 years. Ronald, I don't think you know this, but I'd already known Joe for a couple of years. I met him at his screenwriting course, the class that he teaches in Hollins University in Virginia, which I had audited. And And I was about 3 years in, and I remember Joe, we kind of stayed in contact, and I thought I had this proposal, it was about 75 pages long, and it went through all the aspects of a proposal, marketing and, parallel stories, like stories,
Yeah.
and the sample chapters and an outline. And it was like, I put everything into it. And I was like, who, and I learned by that time that if I gave this to certain people, I would get a lot of like coddling,
Right,
and
right.
niceness. And I was like, who's
Yeah.
going to be a dick? Like, who doesn't care about me, but also cares about me enough
Yeah,
to not
yeah.
eviscerate me? And I was like, Joe Gilford. And
Thank you.
he does story rescue. It's his business where
Mm.
you like
Yes.
give him your work, and then he, really goes through it with a fine tooth comb.
Yeah.
And he did that exactly. It was like very direct. I think the one thing that he said that I'll never forget this, Joe, and this is going to sound bad, but you knew me, and you jokingly
I'm
said it.
afraid of what you're going to say.
It's kind of intense, but I want to. I
I
think
can be very tough. I can be tough. I don't mind being tough.
you said that it was the worst sentence that you'd ever.
Oh yeah,
I
some of the writing was just so awkward. I had to tell you, no, it was bad.
you know
Wasn't anything wrong with the story. We know this is a great story. You're still actually you're gonna revive it. You're in the process of
I am.
reviving
Yeah,
it.
no, it's going really well, and
Wonderful life story.
part
But
of the
yes, no,
yeah.
I had to. Some of Dan's writing was just lousy. You have to say that.
It's
No, you
true.
have to say
It's
that.
true.
I mean, I had a guy, who sent me a script, and it was a big adventure fantasy thing. It's like one of those, it's one of those books you find with a cover with a dragon and a kid on the cover with a big wand or something. Anyway, it's one of those stories, and I have no objection to it as long as you make it into a decent story. But it's not going anywhere. I'm turning page after page. So I knew that he was part of the screenwriting program where you come in and you get coached on every 10 pages with the one-on-one person that they offer at this little screenwriting school in New York, not part of NYU or anything like that. And I said, what was his name? I can't remember his name. But I said, can I see a beat sheet? Can we look at a beat sheet?
What's a beat sheet?
A beat sheet. Did I tell this story already?
No, I don't know what a beat sheet is, though.
You don't know what a beat sheet is?
No
oh my
idea.
God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Gewalt,
There's my problem.
Well, you don't always have to use one. It is professional standard. A beat sheet is a prose outline of your story before you write
gotcha.
in format. Now, the reason we do that is because in a formatted script, you can easily avoid writing the actual story. A beat sheet is a plan. A beat sheet is a coherent story plan in which you write in prose. Ron wakes up and he sees a dead body laying next to him. He calls the police the next day, or Ron gets a call from Richard Nixon. He says, What? Your father's dead. Oh my God, what am I going to do? Next, scene 2, and you number it with scenes because you can't avoid telling the story in a beat sheet. Yeah. You have to tell the pure story. Now, not all writers use it. I guarantee you're going to spend the same amount of time. It's not a shortcut, but for me, it's a way to lay this thing out and to be able to shuffle stuff around. Some people use index card. That's fine too. But there has to be a way for you to get a commanding outline of the story, a real itinerary, as it were, of your story, a calendar almost of your story so that everything is happening. And it's also a way to get criticism and feedback from people on the coherence of what you're doing before you go to the trouble of creating a script. So this guy I talked to said the same thing to me. What's a beat sheet? Now, I didn't know at this particular little film school that they didn't do beat sheets, which to me, I'm sorry, it's part of our rubric in the classes I teach at all the universities. A beat sheet is required. It's required because I don't know how you do it without it. Some people can, but they end up doing 40 drafts instead of 20 because you're going to spend the same amount of time. It's Newtonian. You are going to spend the same amount of energy no matter what. A finished screenplay is a finished screenplay. It requires the same amount of energy from pretty much everybody, whether it's concentrated or if it's spread out over time, same amount of energy. I know that the woman who wrote for Tim Burton, please forgive me, I can't remember her name. She claims to work only on 10 pages a day of formatted script. That day can be 4 hours long or 20. But she has to generate 10 pages that she believes are first draft pages. Okay. So in that sense, she's probably outlining and beat sheeting in her head. For me, I sometimes come upon something which is a coherent scene with something that needs dialogue in format, and I write that out. But then the next scene is, well, something has to happen here that blah, blah, blah. Something has to happen here to change this guy's mind and send him off in this direction. And then I put it in prose. So I get into my own kind of clerical thing. And this is, again, learning how to work the controls. You know, you can drive a stick shift or an automatic. It doesn't matter. It's whatever you want. You can drive a truck or you can drive a Maserati, just as long as you know how to drive it and how that thing is going to work in the end. I believe in a very pure, very classical story structure handed down from Aristotle, from the great dramatists, and from the great screenwriters, and actually from the great picture makers too. You know, they all have to agree on something. And so the vehicle has to have 4 wheels, it has to have an engine that runs, and it has to not break down. And it has to be able to be operated in a coherent and productive kind of way. So as I tell my students, you can bring me any idea you want. That's what I give them permission. I said, you can do anything you want in this class. You just have to make it work. And that's my promise. So the same goes to you. You can do anything you want, work it any way you want, but the story has to work. It has to be meaningful. It has to be thoughtful. And you have to have a reason for having written the damn thing. Because screenplays, stories, drama, novels, all that, they are a utilitarian product. We use them to create our own consciousness through other people's consciousness. By bringing our imagination to people, we're altering the way they look at the world, we hope. Or something, we're causing some, important kind of response. So it really, you have to sit down and write that story about your father, because at that time, it caused something in you that you have to share with other people and that you really have to dramatize, if only for your own kind of amusement.
Yeah.
Now, when you were telling me the story, and I'm glad you're recording this, because I think your answer is a beat sheet. I think your answer is a prose outline, because as you pitched it, as you told it, every single word you said should be written down. If you make a transcription of what you told me, you can't go wrong. It's also a really good piece of short fiction, I think. Not a full-length novel, but that story is an excellent piece of short fiction.
Interesting.
I got a call from blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
She's saying, this is my father's 8th wife. I didn't even know her last name. Friend? My father didn't have any friends.
Yeah.
So I already can hear the stream of consciousness of your main character.
Yeah.
And I'm already hearing the humor in this thing, which is really, let's admit it, this is a funny story.
Yeah.
Because everybody got what they deserved. You should not have gotten involved with them. You should have done that. Now, that is what a great story journey is. And I was telling this to Dan. He's saying, well, what about someone doing heroic stuff? And I said, don't bore me. Don't bore me with all the goodness in humanity. It's not entertaining. It's not entertaining. I'm reading this great book now, the name I can never forget, The Last Halftime Walk. It's about veterans being brought home from Iraq and going to a big party. It is so funny and so cruel. Your story, Ron, is funny and cruel. And those are the movies we love, you know? Being John Malkovich, Big Fish, the work of Tim Burton, the work of the Coen brothers, the work of Steve Soderbergh. I just saw Let Them Talk with Meryl Streep on, I think it was Netflix, about her as a celebrated author on an ocean liner. She's a guest and all that. And it's about what a crappy famous person she turned out to be.
Or The Congress. Have you seen The Congress?
No.
No, what's that?
Oh, it right in line with every movie you just said. It's Robin Wright, and she plays herself. She plays Robin Wright, and it's one of those movies that goes into animation about halfway through.
Hmm.
And long story short, it's her in a universe where her career is washed up and she made a bunch of terrible decisions, and they're asking her, they say, we're offering you one more contract, Robin, right? And it's, we're going to scan your entire body and all your emotions, and now we own you and you never act again. And then it's her taking or not taking that
That's
deal and
great.
all that.
Hmm.
It's pretty
Interesting.
intense and interesting. But I was going to say, Joe, you're one of the most powerful pieces of advice I've ever been given about writing, and on this journey and cutting the sign of my own path to getting this story finished and in the world, was I kept boring myself. I became more and more
Oh,
acutely
gosh.
aware
Yeah.
that I was bored, and I
Thou
thought that it
shalt
was
not bore
interesting.
oneself. The 11th commandment.
Well, the problem is I didn't know I was bored for a long time, because one part of me is like masturbating almost by writing this thing about myself, and then so everything becomes interesting, and then time passes and you learn more about life and you learn more about story and you have some people read it and you realize, oh, this is boring, this is interesting to me and me only, and then at a certain point you become not interested, and that was very powerful for me. And then the other day this is kind of real time. You gave me this piece of advice that you just referenced right there, and the only way I was able to take it is because I'm fictionalizing this now. It's not a memoir. And you basically said you can't be so self-aware of how everything's going to work out, because the way I live my life is very different than how I would write a story about my life that would be welcome and helpful to other people. And so I had to do that great thing that the wonderful writer Martin McDonough, I'm sure he's someone you know well, because he's
Absolutely. Brilliant.
only playwright to have 4 plays up at London Square since Shakespeare. First thing out of the gate, won an Oscar in screenwriting. Then he wrote In Bruges, and this is he describes how he wrote In Bruges. It was based on a trip he himself took to Belgium, and one part of him was like, fuck this place, it's boring as hell, who cares about all the medieval bullshit, and the other part was totally fascinated. And the fact that he could recognize both of those parts, parse them into 2 different characters, and then put them in conflict, and then put them in a situation in Belgium, made for a fascinating story. And your advice to me made me realize, oh, and this is so powerful, I think, in people's lives. Let's parse different parts of our personality and our psyche and our take on things into different people, and we'll recognize the conflicts between them. In story, let's put them in those conflicts. In life, let's work those conflicts out.
That's right. You wake up every morning hoping to avoid anxiety. We know this. Every day we wake up, we pray that it will be a good day and I will not be poor and I will not be unhappy.
Yeah.
But that's not what a screenplay is. It's not what a good story is. A good story is, if you don't feel anxiety, you're going to ask for your money back. Every great story is a study. Distress, anxiety, and misfortune. Every one of your characters' misfortunes is your audience's good fortune.
Mm.
You have to bedevil your character. Now, in your story, Ron is still a really good, coherent example. Your character is already bedeviled by something, but he has a chance to exercise his integrity. He has a chance to fulfill the promise to himself that he made about his father's death. And no, he doesn't. And that's the lesson. I already know I can see what the pitch is. So if you know how this thing ends, which is in the end, he's going to go, oh my God, it's Chinatown. If in the end, he's going to go, why did I listen to these people? And then he doesn't get a do-over.
Yeah.
That's the hardness of the lesson, but it's also the comedy of it too. If you look at The Hangover, which is really a good movie. Look at the first 3 minutes. They wake up. There's a baby in bed with them. There's a tiger in the room. They don't know where they were or how they got there.
Yeah.
And then when they go down to, they have one thing. They have this parking ticket, parking redemption thing. So they go down and they get the car. It's a Las Vegas police cruiser, and a naked Chinaman jumps out of the trunk and runs away. And those are the first like 8 minutes of the movie. What are they going to do now? That's your guy. He gets a call. Not only, sorry, your father is dead, but you'll have nothing to do with the funeral. We're running the show from here on in.
Yeah.
So therein is your conflict. What is the journey to fighting that battle for your character? That's what I would pitch back to you if we had a story conference, which we just had.
We just did. We just totally
did. This is
did.
the biggest plug for storyrescue.com I could possibly make.
Yeah. Wow.
You guys must have a great time in your group.
We do. We do have a great time in our group, and it's given me a kind of confidence I've not had around my writing ever. And not only that, it's given me the ability to peer into other writers' processes and their own pathologies. And I'd say even in the short amount of time that we've been together, I've seen a big uptick in all of our ability to be coherent and to find more of our voice, because we have, I think, the power. You mentioned Serenity earlier in the program, and you're referencing fill in the blank anonymous, like any kind of, the power is community. The power is having people around you see a truth about yourself that you're unwilling to see about, you're unwilling to agree with, until they have a number of people who all say the same thing. And then you have to, you either continue to decide to be a lunatic and disagree with them, or you decide, okay, all these people are saying something that I have a hard time believing, but because they're saying it, I'm going to risk my heart, risk myself, and just decide that they're onto something. I'm going to take their advice and run with it. And that's been my process, but I think it's been the process of everyone else. And I'll even kind of, pick on Daniel a little bit. Like, the change from what I first saw to what I recently saw is profound and so good. It is so good. What he's making is incredible. I'm a very picky, very, very picky writer, well-read. And I'm looking forward to this. And I know in the future, I'm going to get to say I was there when he's, giving talks at bookstores and things like that.
That's beautiful, man. That's beautiful. I had a very good writers group when I started out. And is nothing, listen, getting your work in front of people. You can't exhibit your paintings underwater. You must show your work and get it out there. Now, a lot of my students,
it's massive.
Nobody really has access to the business. It's only a few that really have access to agents and managers and production and pitch meetings and all that. It's only a few people. And I think some of my students have sort of faced that. It has to do with location. It has to do with the world you find yourself in. It has to do when you made your choice to do this. But a lot of them are doing those contests, It's all these screenwriting contests now. And I recommend it, because you get it in front of people and you get a taste of the arbitrary irrationality of what you will probably call your failure. And is not that at all. Yeah. It is simply you putting it out there. When 12 Russians tell you you're drunk, you better lie down, which is when enough people say, that doesn't work. It doesn't.
Yeah.
But be sure to be open to the other side of this. When enough people say this works, listen to them and keep doing that as well, or understand how you got there. That's the most important thing you can do with your work, is understand how you got there, not because I showed you the way, but because you showed yourself the way.
Yeah. I know we're about coming up on it here, Ron, but last thing I'd like to at least add or say is that writing, and I think being an artist and basically creating anything, living life, but in writing and being an artist, I've been shocked at how brave and courageous one needs to be it's almost, it's like, what are you talking about? You need to be brave and courageous. You're sitting in front of a fucking computer. It's like, nah, you need to be brave because you need to maybe cut things that you're attached to. Maybe you need to start over and dive in with who you are now. You need to be brave in how you treat characters. Now we're getting more into how you would be being brave, but there's bravery all the way along through to the end.
Absolutely.
There's
Absolutely.
courage, there's confronting fear, and I've just been like, the only reason, Ron, that I was able to grow in that first month, as much as seems to be happening. I mean, I didn't send it to Joe yet. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
let's pump the brakes a little bit on it being really good. But it was because I was pacing around my house all day one day, hating what I'd been writing. I'm not like hating it in a negative way, but just frustrated. I'm better than this. What
Yeah.
is going on this page? And I was bored with it and I didn't know how to get out of it. And I finally just was like, I took the advice of what I had been told I cut the sign of what I had been told over and over in my life, not just as a writer, but as a human.
Yeah.
And it was have more fun. In this case, for me, it was have more fun.
Mm.
I knew I had courage as a writer, but there was a different piece, and that was have more fun. And then it was really interesting, Joe, very interesting. I rewrote the thing that I had done in about 6 or 7 places, cut a bunch of stuff out, and what I put in was just me diving into fiction writing, me diving into parts of my mind that I thought when I was first doing would be not valuable, would be goofy, would be this or that. I gave that chapter to several people, not only in the writing group, but a few people I also know, and across the board, everything I took out was great. People were grateful that it was gone. But then also their favorite parts were all just happened to be these parts that they didn't know, because they hadn't read the same thing, but it was an incredible
There you
experience
go.
and it was so validating.
You
Great.
can't, don't underestimate time either. It has to do with writing something down and walking away from it. And yes, coming back to it and going, that's not as good as I remember, or this is much better than I remember. You'll get
Yeah.
a full range of that
Oh,
when
interesting.
when you're alone. But also being an artist and being alone, that's why Fran Lebowitz in this wonderful series that Scorsese produced, half-hour interviews with her called Pretend It's City. And she represents every cranky, overly educated New Yorker that you could possibly imagine, including yours truly. And the sense that we are always sort of disturbed that we have to go do this again. And if you're loving it, I don't know. Love is reserved for a rock concert. Love is reserved for a meal. Love is, maybe it's reserved for your partner, but we know that's not a 24/7 condition of marriage or a relationship.
It's part of it. It's just part of it. It's not the whole
part of
thing.
it. It's the goal, but it's work too. And know what work is. Work is lifting. You got to move sometimes from one home to the next. I've been here for 15 years because I don't like moving, but it will be necessary. And it will be necessary for me to pack and get organized and make sure that when I arrive at the other end, it's going to be okay. And that the things that I've done to prepare for that are going to pay off. But it's not fun. It's just necessary. And my God, when you arrive, wow, I have this whole new place. And look, I labeled the boxes properly. I know where everything goes. Writing a screenplay for me is just that. There is a clerical chore involved, which you must adhere to. And then there is also the freedom of bringing your consciousness and imagination to something. And the T word, talent, which you got to have. And I don't know where you get it, but I do know if you do something enough, you will perceive yourself as talented, period.
Yeah.
But you guys must have a great time. I envy you because I'm not in the group right now.
It is very good.
I'm looking.
Joe, this is an incredible gift.
Always a pleasure, really. You guys
you're so fun.
It's spiritual healing, man. It's like I feel healed inside and like ready to. No, seriously, this is great stuff to do, and I'm going to start listening to your. Where do I find this, by the way?
You can just search Cutting for Sign podcast. You can find them on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
What does that mean, cutting for sign?
That's a good question. It's an archaic phrase that means finding the clues, the signals, and the bent pieces of grass for the animal or person that you are tracking out in the open range. It's an old hunter's term and tracker's term, and it's a metaphor for us on finding our true self. What is the small little pieces and clues that we have found, the small omens, Paulo Coelho would say that, omen that we have found seemingly out of nothing, that is actually the universe telling us, this is the way, this is where you need to go, this is your next right step, or it's okay to make a bad step. Stealing from you today. So that's the name from that. It's I grew up in the West. My dad was born probably 150 years too late, and spent the better part of the last years of his life pretending to be a mountain man, dressing up like pre-1830s fur traders, and dragging me all over the West, going to these things where we would shoot black powder rifles and throw tomahawks and knives and start fires with flint and steel. And this like weird vernacular began to seep into my subconscious. And then I, as an adult, found the famous writer Cormac McCarthy, who lives in that vernacular. And so as Daniel and I have been talking for 10 years, working together had always been a dream of both of ours. And over time, this kind of presented itself really clearly. And this phrase rose to the surface.
It's terrific. And you just, by the way, that was your second act flashback.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
It was. I'm telling you. I'm not asking you, Ron.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you. It's your second act flashback.
I appreciate that.
That's where my mind works now. It's a bit much.
Joe, if you look the podcast up, I think you'll enjoy the episode with Tom O'Leary. I think he comes out on Friday. He's an actor from Ireland, and it's a pretty good episode. And you might like other ones, but that one comes to my mind.
We'll send you the link to yours as these come out as well, and you can share them with your kids and your students or anything like that.
Awesome.
And man, you're the best. Thank you so much for this. I can't wait to keep in touch with you.
And, double. Okay, and today was a beautiful day in our country. Remember,
it is. It's a good day to celebrate.
January 20th, 2021, and my God, I just exhaled.
We all collectively did.
And with those masks on, it doesn't smell good right now.
That's right. That's right.
Okay,
Thank you,
man.
Joe. Take care of yourself.
Have a great one.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, sir. Awesome.
Okay. Hold on one second. Hey, welcome to the field dressing of Cutting for Sign. Today we had Joe Gilford, part 2. What a treasure that guy is. That was an insane encouragement to me as a writer, as somebody who has denied a part of myself for a long time. Didn't feel qualified to put my ideas on paper. And I got to say, over this last year, better part of a year, over a year since I've dedicated myself to writing, I've been surprised what has come up. And this was completely unexpected. I did not see this coming at all. To have number one, just a conversation with somebody of his caliber. Number one, like the end of that is just a gift. But number two, to have him encourage me to pick up something I thought was dead, and then show me why I should, was massively encouraging.
I've pitched and seen him talk about pitched stories a lot. I took his class, and he doesn't bullshit when it comes to things that don't work. And the fact that he so clearly picked out and recognized that you had a story and that you should tell it. And also he was like, don't change a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was encouraged for you, It's
And
interesting when life overlaps the work that we're doing here, in real time. I think it's the best.
it is. My only problem now is a champagne problem. Where you're like, oh, the bubbles in
Too
the
many
champagne
stories.
tickling. Yeah, it's like, what do I work on?
Yeah,
And I'm in
I
the
was
middle of
thinking that.
working on right now, but you know, it gives me a lot of material to work on for a lot of years. And maybe I was just thinking maybe I'll hit the print button and just print that out, and then a little at a time, just start to write that beat sheet right next to the thing that exists.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and but I thought what I was thinking of as he was describing the writing process, and this is what we were talking about during part one, is if a character is what he does, how do we want to live our life, and what is the work we want to put into the
Yeah,
elements that create the life that we want
yeah,
and create
exactly.
the story arc that we want. Because
Yeah,
if you are just like bored with your own life, that's your fault. but it's but like you were talking about, as you were kind of interested in writing your character or your story, and that feeling of like, it kind of felt like masturbation. I love that, what you were saying there, because I think we all get into that, where we're interested in ourselves and
yeah,
interested in this little myopic world that we're in. And then after a while, you've got to recognize, like, wait a second, this isn't as thrilling as I thought, and you've got to make some changes. And I think that carries both over to our writing world, which is, I've been there before, man, like bored
yeah,
to tears writing, like just chunking things out. And also life, where you're like, why am I doing this? Why do I have this
yeah.
job? Why am I in this relationship? What's going on here? Is this okay? No, it's not okay. It's the world trying to get your attention.
Yeah. And it's a skill. It's a skill set to be able to recognize story. And you might say, well, I'm not a writer. I'm not a storyteller. So that might not matter to me. But stories are so, and obviously I don't need to beleaguer this point, but like stories are obviously very important to us as humans, mythologically, and then entertainment wise, and then all the areas in between that, are the things we believe about ourselves, the stories we tell about ourselves, which is what you were talking about the last time, Joe, we had him on here. And I think that the ability to pick out and parse out elements of story and elements of a character, that skill turned back on oneself, turned onto the people around you. I,
Yeah,
I don't know if there's many skills that would be more valuable. It
yeah,
helps you cut the fat of your life, get clear, and everything that you're supposed to do with a character. You're doing that 90-day novel writing course,
yep,
and the first thing that you told me that the exercise was on the first day was something to the effect of, what's your character believe in, what do they want, where are they going, how would they react in this situation. I'm just like, asking those questions of ourselves, coming up with good honest answers, or ever
yeah,
more honest answers,
yeah, yeah.
or even just having a lot of people are busy and overwhelmed, just having the question floating out there in the ether, that's valuable.
Yeah, that is one of those questions that is, or exercises of reflection, that we sometimes think of in passing and rarely bring intentionality to. We rarely bring enough attention to, what do I really want in my life? We think about it
Yeah,
like it's a thought in passing. Well, I'd really like a good relationship or a decent job, but it's not something that we put a lot of attention in, as much as where we're going to plan out the arc. And and I think a lot of the reason we don't is because we've got hope beat out of us. We think we're going to try something,
yeah,
and
there you go.
and it fails, and maybe for all the wrong reasons. Like with me writing that screenplay in my 20s, I didn't actually deserve any of the pity that I was wallowing in, right?
What do
Maybe,
you mean?
well, what I mean is, like, maybe if I had like tried 20 times, or had like moved to LA and like, wrote this screenplay, gone through 20 drafts, gone to 20
Mm,
pitch meetings, like
I see
then
what you mean.
then maybe I
Absolutely.
deserved a little bit of self-pity, right? Then maybe I could say, like, this sucks, this is really hard, and now I'll go do it. But
Yeah,
I didn't. I wrote it like pretty quickly. I wrote it in my spare time. I gave it to one guy who said he wanted to see it, who had some success in Hollywood, thinking that somehow magically it was going to, be the best. Good Lord, Ronald, this is the best screenplay I've ever read. That's the expectation I had in my mind. And when he didn't, I was like, oh shit, I should never do this again. And not realizing, to break the 4-minute mile took a tremendous amount of work. To run a marathon at all takes a tremendous amount of work.
And not only that, Ronald, but I think in the story of your own life, as I look at it and see it through the storytelling eyes that I am developing.
Yeah.
But like that screenplay, that thing you put out there was indicative of perhaps, correct me if I'm wrong, but where you were in life and how well you knew yourself in life. And maybe you were a first draft of yourself or a second draft of yourself at that time. And your life was a product of that understanding, knowing, and effort. And now, I mean, we're talking about a chunk of time. Is that 15 years, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly. I mean, it's been like, all of K through 12 has happened again.
Yeah.
Since then. It's like I've got my diploma of adulthood since then.
Yeah, man. And now it's on the table in some way again, or at
Yeah.
least writing, and it is on the table and you're producing. And to be coming, I would think that the product that you create based on the who that you are now would be something immensely closer to being able to catch the attention of someone of the world and be produced into something, or at least, okay, instead of draft one, maybe even though this is the second draft you've done, it's almost like this will be more like that draft would have been on like draft 10 of 20, or 10 of 15. I don't know, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's got my curiosity peaked, and I'm gonna give the screenplay a read again. But I think, as somebody who has I'm thinking about who's listening to this, and I'm thinking about what I want them to walk away from in this. And I mean, number one is like, effort is required. I'm realizing how much effort in hindsight, of course, that I needed to put in. But I love the mercy that you're kind of lending to me by saying like that you were in your first draft and you're at that point in your life, and you didn't know you needed another go at it. And the reality is in that sense too is like, I had gone through a first draft. I had just gotten a divorce at that point, and felt like it was a new start for me. And it's interesting now how much that feeling was pushing my writing, and how like intertwined it was. It's almost like that feeling of the divorce and the experience of the divorce like poisoned the story. And now that I've got all this time away from the divorce, like the divorce almost has nothing to do with that story anymore in my mind. And
Wow.
be really interesting to go back to it. But I distracted myself just then, but I'm just thinking an interesting life, a life that feels good takes a lot of intent. And I'm living a life where I feel really good about my decisions. And it's taken a lot of discipline and effort, and a lot of discomfort in a lot of ways, a lot of suffering in a lot of ways. And it took me a long time to realize that those three things, effort, discipline, suffering, are actually paths to freedom. And those are the things those are the paths you want to walk down. Those are the elements, the tools you want to take with you down the dark path, I think.
What's that scene in I don't know which Lord of the Rings movie it is, but the one where the king is on the thing and Gandalf comes up and like sucks the Sauron, or the wizard has a spell on him and he like sucks it out of him. Do you know what scene I'm talking about?
Is that it's the Return of the King, and Wormwood is the guy who's like speaking the evil curses into his ear. Yeah, that is such that's such a metaphor to our own life, isn't it?
Well, I think about your script particularly. I use that little scene a lot in my own life, but it was really clear when you said that the divorce was in that script, and it's like time, or maybe you now would reapproach that script as Gandalf would approach that king, and you'd be like sucking the divorce out of it because it's not part of the story, and
Yeah.
then what happens, this thing that is literally worthless,
Yeah.
actually becomes the powerful king, and I think that in any way we can do that in our lives, obviously is something we should do, recognizing, but just thinking that we have other elements in ourselves and we can remove part of them, at least parse them out a little bit and see our lives through more clear lenses. It's the same thing with that script.
Oh man, that's so good, dude. Thanks for bringing Joe on. That's such a cool thing to get to do, and this has turned such a great chapter for both of us in our lives, and created
Yeah.
a really great
Special, man.
opportunity for both of us.
I want, if we do another iteration of this, we're probably below his league, I guess, now that I think about it. But I had this idea. I was like, oh, he's looking for a writing group. I was like, yes.
No, we should definitely. I was thinking we should be bold and ask him.
Anyways,
that's right.
my pleasure, man. Thank you for leading this ship. It's been a pleasure and honor, and that was one of the highlights for me, is talking to Joe.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this, man. All right, man. Till next time. Take care.
Adios.